Okay, I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting for today, March 10, 2015. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Anthony Netto.
Here.
Mark Finkel.
Here.
Albert Hayes.
Here.
David Bergstresser.
Here.
Jeffrey Rosenthal.
Excuse me.
Michael Clark.
Here.
Robert Leslie.
Here.
Robert Fulton.
Here.
John Hudson.
Here.
Richard Ferrari. Here. Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. I guess at this time I'd ask for a motion to adopt or revise the current meeting agenda for today.
I so move.
All right, I'll second that. So it's adopted as is.
Mr. Finkel to Mr. Netto.
And at this time, I'll also ask for a motion to approve the January 7, 2015 Finance Committee meeting minutes. As outlined.
I so move.
And I'll second that.
Could you guys vote too, please?
Okay, and,
Is that necessary? Thank you.
okay, and I'll ask for a vote at this time. Those in favor of adopting?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Okay, so the approval motion passes. So now the more important stuff, the committee business. The new business today is to advance to the full board and recommend the adoption of a draft 2016 budget and financial plan prepared by Mr. Ferrara. If Mr. Ferrara wishes to comment prior to that motion.
On page 5 is my memo. This is an annual requirement pursuant to Section 2801 of the Public Authority Law. It requires all state authorities to submit the upcoming budget out on the Public Authority website. And in this case, for the district, would be the budget year beginning July 1, 2015. However, as we all know, that budget is still in draft, which is fine. This is just a report. Doesn't obligate the board to stay with this when they ultimately adopt a budget in June, so it can be whatever it is in June. The report, which is on the following page, on page 6, the landscape report. First column is our actual results, audited results from 2014, so through June 30th, 2014. Then all of the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 3 of those years, 2015. 15 is an estimate for what I forecast this year to close at. 16, 17, 18 is basically in according to the current draft budget that we have, yes.
The only thing I would interject is the totals you're looking at for each of those years are combined,
Combined what?
both watersheds.
Yeah, well, right,
That's all.
right. None of the public authority reports ever require any
Absolutely.
split out.
I
So
only-
we're always doing total difference.
I only point that out because when the discussion of the budget preparation, we're looking at two different budgets.
Correct, correct.
Two different bottom lines. Anyway, thank you.
Correct. So this is the total. So then you have 16, 17, 18, which is the draft budget. Then they'll go out an additional year, which is just another year out, which is generally just 2%, I think is what I generally estimate off of the last year of the draft budget. So that is the report. Upon your adopting this, it will be placed electronically on the Public Authority website upon my return to the office.
Just the other non-operating revenue.
Other non-operating revenue.
What constitutes? Because I know.
Okay. Generally speaking, over the years, general non-operating revenue would go. Let's go to a budget page. That would be helpful to look. If you go to page 11 in the board packet. So water power is so water power would be under other operating revenue. Obviously, our assessments are charges for services. And then things like sale of surplus, anything from unappropriated fund balance, which in our case would be any surplus from the close of a fiscal year that does not reflect anything that's already encumbered for that year.
Okay.
And water power specifically represents the proceeds from the annual contracts and monthly payments thereof from the Lake 4 operating agreement for Great Sacandaga Lake, EJ West, and also that includes Mercer. That's right, isn't it, Rick?
Right, Mercer and Black River and
Yes.
EJ West.
Are they still paying us money?
Yes. Correct.
Mercer's much smaller than the ROA at EJ West.
Okay.
I have a quick
I wasn't
question.
going to get into the, I'm sorry.
No, also the bond proceeds,
Right.
they're separated or distinguished each year going forward?
Correct.
And does
So-
that include interest on those bonds as well?
Correct.
Okay.
So so if you, I wasn't going to get into the particulars of the bonded numbers on the budget and financial plan, because I'm certainly going to get into it when we discuss the budget, because they're the same number.
Sure.
But beginning in the first year of the draft budget, which would be ending June 30th, 2016, and then for the next years after, you will see interest on the bonds and the principal. So they are delineated. The thing is that they're combined principal for the bonds associated with the capital projects in the black, and principal and interest combined for the projects in the Hudson. So they're not split out. So if you, again, everything here is total district, not Black and Hudson. The interesting thing with the bonds and the way the state wants stuff reported is that, go back up to your revenue, total revenue and financing, they want you to include your total revenue from your bonds, proceeds from bonds. And then also, in your expenses, they want you to show all of those bonded amounts as capital expenditures. And then and in this case, they're treating them, they're also wanting you to designate the payments for as long as you're going to amortize them. We'll get into the amortization tables, which I believe the financial risk advisor suggested 20-year amortizations to fit our cash flow. Didn't have to go out 30, but certainly couldn't do 10. So 20 looked like a happy medium. The only other issue beyond that would be in what chunks these bonds, the underwriters will, put these bonds out for sale. We don't know that yet. We'll know that when we go to market. So, and we're certainly months away from that.
Thank you.
So, yes, so this is just, it's just a public authority report. It is not, the only thing that's actually actual on this report is our most recent audited results from last year. The rest of it is basically our draft budget and a forecast.
So we need a motion.
Yep, we'll ask for more.
I'll make a motion to advance to the full board and recommend adoption of the 2016 budget and financial plan.
Thank you.
And I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, so that leads us to the actual draft 3-year budget discussion, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you wish to add anything on
Yeah,
that?
on page 8, I've provided the board a summary or overview of the our statute is different in many ways than other statutes, particularly as it pertains to how you develop your budget. Primarily, the two drivers are the fact that we have two separate funds, two separate statutory set of beneficiaries, and we also have a 3-year budget, not a 1-year budget. 1 year's difficult, 2 years is very tough, 3 year is a throw it against the wall. Very, very tough to come up, which is why 3-year budgets will generally result in overages, which is fine. It's nature of the beast. Nobody is going to develop a 3-year budget and keep it real tight, because you get one shot at it, and after the board doesn't have authority to go out and do another assessment, we prefer not to do that. So I've listed our revenue sources are few. We have our statutory beneficiaries who pay the ultimate assessment, so it's a reverse budget. We determine what we need to operate, and the biggest part of that operation are generally the capital projects that revolve around the dam structures and anything associated with that. Once you determine that, and the other big piece of the budget in the Hudson are the property and school taxes, which are generally $2.7 million and change. Once you've determined your total expenses, you then say, what other revenue sources do we have? And again, limited. We have our water power agreements, as the director mentioned. We get some interest. We sell some stuff, some vehicles, sale of surplus. And we may use from a prior budget period some surplus. That would be the unappropriated fund balance line. So once we determine what those numbers are, that gets subtracted from the total expenses, and what's ever left is then spread among the beneficiaries, and in this case, it's the 2 sets of beneficiaries in the Black and the Hudson, and in the Hudson you have also the state, whose number is currently locked at, refresh my memory, 22.18%, something in that neighborhood.
Yes.
So that's how we develop the budget. So it's not a typical budget where most companies are saying, you know, what are we selling and what are we making and selling, retail, whatever. And then, so what can we spend, who can we hire, blah, blah, blah. We do it the opposite way. We have to operate, and then whatever we need to operate, that becomes our revenue stream.
The requirement for the 3-year budget is statutory.
Correct.
Set up that way back in the dark ages,
from the beginning.
1920s.
I then got into each of the areas, and there's some nuances and specific items that pertain to the areas that, to one area that may not pertain to another. In the Hudson River area, we have a consent agreement that is basically governs our budget out through actually the end of this cycle that we're talking about, June 30th, 2018. That annual assessment can be no higher than $2,994,100, which is what makes the Hudson River budget very, very static. I mean, we basically looked at last year's budget and said, what really changed? And the biggest change was the capital projects. When we determined the size of the capital projects, then we said, well, then we'll have to amortize them over this period of years, and we selected 20 to stay within that revenue stream of the $2,994,100. I've listed the primary capital projects, which is the spillway reconstruction that the board has already approved the bond resolution for. We're also looking at a reconstruction of Indian Lake. That would also require a bond resolution. We have not done that yet. We have not presented it, because right now the plan is that we probably wouldn't do anything until the 3rd year of the budget.
And there's not a final plan yet.
And there's not a final plan, but it's in this budget. But before we probably have a final plan, the board's going to probably be adopting this budget.
Well,
So we'll get the numbers.
The chief engineer said we've had some preliminary discussions of what may be coming, but I don't, Rob, we don't have any preliminary design at this point, or even
No.
even a facilities plan where that says we're going in this direction, even
Right.
pin down what we're looking at.
We generally know what components of the facility, what regulations we're not conforming with, and those components that need to be improved in order to conform with those state safety regulations. So, out of that, we've been able to develop a ballpark estimate. While, yes, probably it's best at this point, but at least a placeholder for those repairs. And over the next year or so, we'll develop some design and work towards a final design for remediation.
Thank you. I mean, that's my point in asking, Rob, is that we're a year away or better from actually pinning down what that project's going to look like and cost.
Right.
But the budget will be passed before that happens.
Correct.
Which is why,
We have to put it into the budget, pass it in the budget, but we don't know what we're.
correct,
It's not,
correct. But the number that will be in the budget will clearly be, will satisfy any expenditures late in our budget cycle. So let's say, for whatever reason, the estimate is low.
Right.
The budget's gonna, the cycle's gonna end the 30th of 2018.
Right.
June 30th, 2018, we'll then be in another budget cycle. We can do another bond. And we will not be hamstrung by the limitation of the 2.994/100. So we'll be able to take care of any shortage in the next cycle. I don't expect, again, I think some of the numbers you and I have talked about, I mean, do we feel they're going to be 50% off? I don't think so. There's going to be contingencies built in. But even if that were the case, the amount that's in the budget certainly would satisfy anything that goes on in the last year of the budget.
Right.
So if I can summarize, essentially the draft budgets contain bond revenue that we may get to in the next 3 years.
Correct.
So
Specifically for, that has not been presented
Correct.
previously for Indian Lake. There's also several projects in Black River.
Sure.
That Old Forge and Six Lake, similar reconstruction projects that are also in this 3-year draft.
Included in the bond.
That would be included in bonds that the board has not at this time reviewed and/or passed a bond resolution. Again, also out in the last part of the cycle.
and are also still in preliminary design.
Sure.
At that point. So the actual project, or projects for those are not well-defined yet.
No, and also in the case of Sixth Lake and Indian Lake, similarly to our approach with Hawkinsville, now that we have an assessment of the conditions or the insufficient capacities that you typically have, older structures that now need to conform with new regulations. Similar to Hawkinsville, we hope to, before we go into a final design for remediation, take a harder look at the hydraulics and maybe be able to bring some of those design flows down. And in doing so, we would then hopefully be able to reduce the level of effort necessary to remediate and still be in compliance with the regulations. So I see that as kind of an interim step probably at both Indian Lake and more so at Indian Lake. Sixth Lake, I think it might be more of a case of arguing the point or making the point with the DEC with regard to the...
So you think it's a good possibility they'll get reclassified?
Probably not a hazard classification change, but the actual design flood, which the facility needs to safely pass, can be modified based on conditions in the river downstream. So, in both cases, and we're just coming out of that first phase of engineering that has led us to being able to say that might be a possibility. So.
And a reduction in the design flood still impacts what we would have to spend in a project.
Yes. Yep.
To accommodate those requirements, parameters.
Exactly.
This Rob's capital plans also in these draft documents on page 25, 26, 27, and 28. And because this isn't in color, the shaded areas are the items that are actually bonded items. The items that are not shaded are actual dollar amounts in the budget for the particular year that it's sitting under. So you can, it just gives you a sense for all of the things that the chief engineer believes needs to be accomplished in this 3-year cycle are either covered through the bonds or by actual dollar amounts budgeted in those particular years.
So without the bonds for those 3 projects, we can move them forward though, correct? The Indian Lake and Old Forge and Six Lake.
Correct. Yes.
And are we stuck at these numbers if we pass this draft budget?
If we were to pass this draft, if we would fast forward to June,
Sure.
if we meet in June and nothing has changed and we pass what's in here, yes.
Okay.
The numbers are the numbers, and again, if the first bond resolution had more than ample, and this was stressed over and over again by bond counsel, do not come in under what, just make certain that what you're going to bond is going to cover all expenses, and make sure that you have contingencies in there that will satisfy any, because you do not want to go back and have to revisit the whole project and do another bond and another resolution. So I'm very confident that the spillway reconstruction, Hawkinsville, which we have really solid numbers on, are more than ample. If it turns out they're not, again, I don't think there's anything not in here that we couldn't satisfy in the next cycle.
Yeah, I think I was more talking about the Indian Lake, the Old Forge, and the Six Lake projects.
Right.
If we pass, you have three numbers for each of those
Right.
projects.
Right.
If we pass this draft budget, are we stuck, what if the estimates come in higher than what we passed?
Then we have, then in the next cycle, because we're not planning on doing these
Okay.
until late in
All
this
right.
upcoming cycle, which would be year
Fair
2018,
enough.
we would have more than ample time to relook at where
Okay.
we're short. I don't expect that to happen, but we would have ample time to do that and build that into the next 3-year cycle.
Right?
All right, that's
Or even completing a portion of the work at the end of the current upcoming 3-year and completing the next in another construction season, which would take us to the next
Into the
3 years.
next 3 year, correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anything else?
So in terms of the budget schedule, as we move along, we'll probably have out of a committee, formal committee setting, I'm sure we'll have several more meetings. And then I believe, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but there would be at least one more, should be one more committee meeting before the committee that moves it to the full board for adoption. We have April, May, so it'll be April, May.
Probably another finance committee meeting in May.
Yeah, you could, right, it would probably make sense to look at a final draft in May, the meeting before June, and then in June, it's just basically the formal moving to the board for adoption. So the board doesn't have to take it, the committee, there's no action to take it.
Right now? Okay, great.
Just review, ask questions, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of detail here, I know, so.
Well, if there's no further business, I'll move to adjourn the finance committee.
All right, well, I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?